Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. And if you're wondering, it was not I who said that for the first time. It was actually the 31st President of the United States, President Hoover. Well, today our discussion on Face the Nation centers around the economy of Sri Lanka and the IMF. Last week, of course, we discussed about democracy, sovereignty, the people's rights, and the social contract. Today, we are hosting our discussion on maybe the flip side of that coin. And to assist us in this discussion and, of course, bring about content and essence to our program, we've got with us an expert panel, as we always do. Up first, we've got Dr. Howard Nicholas, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us on our show. We've also got with us Dr. Ganeshamurthy, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the University of Colombo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for accepting our invitation. Also with us is Dr. Kalpa Rajapaksha, Lecturer at the Department of Economics and Statistics of the University of Peradeniya. Thank you very much, Doctor. And no stranger to the show, we've got Raj Prabhu, Senior Research Analyst at Verity. Thank you very much, Raj, for coming on our show. So to get the ball rolling, really, there's much to discuss, much has been said, but still so much to understand. Now first, Dr. Howard Nicholas.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for inviting me here. It's good to be here, good to be in Sri Lanka, and to be with eminent panel here. What I want to do is to focus on the problems with the IMF program. There are positives, which I don't want to go into, but rather I want to focus on what I see are the problems. And there, the starting point is the fundamental premise of the entire program is that Sri Lanka has had this protracted trade imbalance, and that has led to debt and currency crisis, these two. The source of it, according to the IMF, is the government's budget deficit and printing to finance that budget deficit. I disagree, and I think they make certain fundamental mistakes in their analysis. Now, one of the consequences of the IMF approach is they tell Sri Lanka, you must cut the deficit. You actually have to get what they call a primary surplus by 2025, meaning the current expenditure should be less than the tax revenue. They also say that the central bank should stop printing to finance the deficit, meaning the central bank should not enter the primary treasury bill market and buy any government debt. And here we have, yesterday, I believe, the introduction of the Monetary Law Act. It was gazetted, and it'll go...
The amendment.
Actually, that's interesting you say that. I keep saying the amendment, but actually this is almost a new Monetary Law Act. This is what I've seen, but my colleagues may correct me. I kept saying amendment, but I don't read that in this. Then one of the aspects of that which I'm particularly concerned about is this independence of the central bank, meaning that there's no democratic oversight of the central bank, and I find that very pernicious. Then the third thing that they're proposing is that we go back to the debt market, the foreign debt market, borrow more ISBs, and I find that really problematic as well. So I have these three criticisms. I'll mention them very quickly. One, there's no evidence that the government's budget deficit and printing has caused this 40-year trade deficit in excess of 10% of GDP. There's no evidence. We've had periods where actually there's been very little printing and very little by way of a budget deficit, and large budget deficits and a lot of printing, and yet we've had almost exactly the same trade deficit continuously. So For me, there's no evidence, and I've yet to see anybody present that. The second thing is the quantity theory of money, which is the basis for this argument, has been discredited. And I could say more about that. The third thing is nowhere is the fundamental problem addressed, which is the trade balance. And there's no proposal to actually increase Sri Lanka's export earning capacity. And this means to say, if we adopt the policies of the IMF, in a few years' time, we're likely to be back where we are now, probably worse off.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard. Very interesting sentiments from the beginning of the show. I now move my attention to Dr. Ganeshamurthy, Senior Lecturer in Economics, University of Colombo.
What I get from this particular issue is that so far the responses to this problem came from the demand side of the economy. But what actually happened is the problem of a supply side. So basically what they are proposing is, where the problem is in the supply side, the solution is given from the demand side, where the economy is in downturn.
Doctor, when you say they, who do you mean?
The government.
Okay.
Actually, this particular crisis happened not from the demand side, where the people spend more and there were increasing kind of a inflow of luxurious goods, etc., etc. It didn't happen in that way. When you look at the composition of Sri Lanka's imports, it's more than 75% is 80%, if you want, it's intermediate goods and investment goods. So these are used for development purpose. So if the demand for consumers have gone up and creating all this problem, which is wrong. Government consumption has gone up, that is true, but it is not the people whose demand have gone up and creating this problem. So the response was squeezing the demand by increasing taxes and also reducing the imports, mitigating the choices of people, and demand side responses were given for a supply side problem. I don't think that it is a useful approach. And when the economy is in downturn, just applying the contractionary fiscal and monetary policies will further strengthen the economy. And when will you then expect growth? People may say that, okay, first you have to bring the inflation under control by increasing interest rates, and then stability should be maintained, then we talk about economic growth. That was the kind of argument they put forward. So how long you allow the economy to shrink? That is the fundamental mistake what I see here. So as long as you allow the economy to shrink, and it's very difficult to take it up, it will be more painful than what we are doing right now. So it's fundamentally wrong, and making us a primary balance within few years or 2 years. The primary balance was negative for a long period of time. You cannot make it overnight, right, into a positive territory. And this is what exactly the government is saying, that we want to make the primary balance surplus, and the 15 guidelines, if you want conditionalities. And what are those 15 conditionalities, we don't know yet. But the 15th conditionality is increasing electricity bills. So basically what they want to do is squeeze the demand and try to stabilize the economy at a lower level of equilibrium.
Again, Doctor, when you say they, you mean government?
Yes. I would say they refer both government and IMF. It can be both. But
we'd never know.
We don't know. But it should come to the parliament, and these are the programs agreed upon, and still it's not happening. So here and there they say, okay, this will be their expectation, and this we agreed upon. So the last kind of a glimpse came in, saying that this is the last agreement or last condition should be fulfilled. Now we have fulfilled all the conditions, and the IMF the ball is in the IMF's court to release the funds.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ganeshamurthy. I now move my attention to Dr. Kalpa Rajapaksa, Lecturer, Department of Economics and Statistics, University of Peradeniya.
Thank you, Benedict, for inviting me. I think I'll approach the whole discussion like this. I think without understanding the nature of the crisis of Sri Lankan economy, we cannot justify the IMF deal. And we cannot think about how to move forward as a nation, as an economy. So I think there are two fundamentals if you want to understand the crisis, there are two fundamentals that I want to mention. The first fundamental is the crisis has a structural situation, structural nature. So the way we actually organize the economy since 1977, when the neoliberal capitalism actually introduced. So we have to understand that there's a deep structural crisis in the economy. It connects to the trade, the way we actually organize labor, how we produce things, everything actually related to the way we organize the economy. The other aspect is that there's a contingency crisis. So when we're actually accumulating debt over time, we don't know when this accumulation debt would actually trigger another level of economic crisis. So there are two things that we have to understand. There's a deep structural crisis in the economy, and also there can be contingency crisis in developing nations like Sri Lanka. So without understanding these two, I don't think we can understand the IMF deal and at the same time how to move forward. And also I want to mention that two things went to crisis. First thing is that, as I mentioned before, the introduction of neoliberal policies, and also the class actually organized, implemented these policies, which is the capitalist class. It has gone to crisis. And also the way we understand economy, my colleagues know, neoclassical economics has gone to crisis. They cannot really explain this crisis. And also, which means that they cannot really forecast what's going to happen.
When you say neoclassic economics, you mean theories?
Absolutely. The theories that we teach in academia, basically.
We still teach those?
We do, unfortunately, we do. For an example, let the market to decide. It's a very fundamental factor in neoclassical economics, and also how you should let the capital to determine the outcomes of the economy. So I think these two things have gone to crisis. Next thing I want to mention is that the nature of the IMF deal so far. I think my colleague clearly mentioned that there's no transparency at all. We don't know what's going on. There are 15 things that President mentioned that we are trying to fulfill. But what are those things? At one point, Ranil Wickremesinghe clearly mentioned in the parliament that if we actually reveal the document to the society, there will be another crisis, there will be another Aragale, there will be another uprising. So what are these things? We are really curious about what are these 15 points. And also, the responses from the IMF is very slow. It's very surprising. And also, there are geopolitical factors that we have to take into account. If IMF really wants to help Sri Lanka, they really should not take geopolitical factors into account. So I think there are really unclear segments in the IMF deal. I think we have to, the people who actually inform, people who are actually really interested, they have to get into details and reveal the details to the society.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajapaksa. Finally, we move our attention to Raj Prabhu, Senior Research Analyst at Verite.
Yes, so thank you very much for inviting me to the show. And I would also echo the panel in terms of the lack of transparency in the IMF deal, and especially in the prior actions. But in addition to that, you also see a lack of transparency in the DSA, that is the debt sustainability analysis done by the IMF. And this sentiment is echoed in the assurances provided by the bondholders, where they have also expressed concerns over the IMF path and the path that we and the IMF has designed together. And it's very hard to critique when you don't know what the assumptions are and when the DSA is not made public. So in addition to the prior actions not being made public, and as far as we are aware, everything that has been known is being done, the prior actions. But it's not clear as to what those 15 points are and what exactly the IMF wants. And what that allows is for the government to conduct anti-democratic practices using the IMF as a shield. For example, with the electricity pricing, where the government kept saying that they had to do this for the IMF program, we are going to bypass the PUCSL and go ahead with it. It's very strange that the IMF would require Sri Lanka to break the law and approve electricity pricing when the PUCSL has not clearly given its approval. But due to the lack of transparency, we are uncertain about.
But then, Prabhu, when you say the PUCSL has not given their approval, I think they did give their approval. The chairman objected.
Objected, exactly. So you don't have a unanimous approval.
There's no requirement for unanimous.
Exactly. But the concern is basically that you can use, even with for example, when you don't know what the prior actions are, you will have to rely on the government's concern, even on local government elections. You see how the government uses the IMF as a shield. But what we need to see is the greater transparency, either from the government or IMF or together. And in addition to that, what we see is that it's not just in Sri Lanka, but even our bilateral partners and bondholders have echoed the same concern on the lack of transparency.
But Prabhu, now when you say we need more transparency on the part of the IMF and the government is answerable to the people.
Yes.
The IMF is not.
True.
So if the government is hiding information, can the IMF really come above that and be like, here, you're looking for this? This is the information. Can they do that?
So what's interesting is that I might pull a case study from Argentina. So in 2018, Argentina had one of the largest standby arrangement programs, and that program failed. And that was a large program, even from the perspective of the IMF. So they did analysis to study why did the program fail, and they released a report, and this report is public, where they said that the lack of ownership over the program was one of the reasons for the program to fail, because the program was designed to benefit the government at that time and not the economy at large. And in response to that, the Argentinian House of Representatives passed a law that said that any multilateral engagement or bilateral engagement, so any loans, including with the IMF, ADB, needs to go to Parliament and gain parliamentary approval before it's being made, before the process is done. So I think, like you said, the government is also answerable, but the IMF can also put this information out. So we are yet to see the transparency aspect coming in. In addition to that, there's another problem which I can go into detail when we get into discussions is Sri Lanka has entered into IMF programs previously as well. So we need to also see what the government plans on doing differently, because like we said, the primary surplus is also something that has only happened in four instances since independence. So that we need to see what the government is planning on doing differently this time as opposed to the past, and that is also not very clear. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much, Raj. Of course, the floor is now open to questions from our journalist. On my right, Attorney at Law Ravindra Jayakodi, and on my left is Shania Dedigama. Shania?
Thank you, Shalan. I actually have a question for Dr. Nicholas and Dr. Ganeshamurthy as well. Dr. Nicholas, your opening statement kind of voiced the flaws in the IMF package. Now, discourse around this bailout kind of points towards the fact that more than the 2.9 billion bailout package, it's about restoring investor confidence and credibility, legitimacy back to Sri Lanka. Do you disagree with this premise that it gives back a sense of access to capital in the international market, investor confidence? Seeing as your opening statement pointed to flaws and a lack of transparency and clarity, would you disagree with that premise?
Actually, for me, it's, with due respect, it's not a matter of transparency. It's actually much more fundamental than that. The IMF doesn't have any developing country's interest in helping them have a sustainable solution to their problems. This is my view. Their job is not about that. Their job is basically keeping them on a string. And they need to have that country coming back to them over time. That's why there's no permanent solution that they're offering. Now, they come with this idea of investor confidence. There's only one thing that investors are confident about when you create a profits environment. IMF packages do not create a profits environment. They create a rentier environment. So rentiers are very happy That means people who just make money from high interest rates. But the producers who produce and earn a profit, they're hammered with these programs. And that's not just in Sri Lanka, that's everywhere. Because actually you can't name a country where the IMF has helped them develop export-oriented industrialization. It's only countries that don't work with the IMF that have gone down that path. And on the few occasions that those countries have actually somehow gotten into a mess, like Korea, for example, in the East Asian crisis, the IMF tried to damage that process. And the Koreans will never forgive them for it. I assure you. You know, I've had students from Korea, and they never forgive the IMF for this malicious attempt to damage their export-oriented industrialization process.
But Dr. Howard, you know, your contentions, your views, there are those who speak in favor, there are those who speak against, but of course these are all opinions, right? And you know what they say about opinions, what they're like. So Dr. Howard, my question to you is, in the current context of Sri Lanka, we are in a situation where we've had certain economic issues, structural issues, all the issues that were highlighted during the opening statements. And we sat on those issues. We sat on those issues until it came to a breaking point, until people did not have gas, people did not have fuel, people did not have food, and they were out on the street. This ended up in the people chasing away a democratically elected executive president, the prime minister, and, stripping away the mandate of a government that was appointed with a 2/3 majority, first time through an election. So at this point of time, if you are saying IMF is not the best deal, what is?
Well, what I think is still on the table for Sri Lanka is to pursue bilateral financing. I still think this is available to Sri Lanka, but what we have is, let's say, a drumbeat that there's no other alternative but the IMF. Now, we may actually eventually go to the IMF, but I think there's a good space for us to actually approach potential bilaterals. And there, I repeat many times to people, don't go with the begging bowl. What we have to go with is actually a business proposition. I mean, are there countries that are actually interested in moving some of their firms to come and invest in Sri Lanka? Because then they have a vested interest in supporting us.
Dr. Nicholas, wouldn't you say that, I mean, Sri Lanka's lack of credibility is essentially why we cannot even gather up a business proposal? I think, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, in your closing statement, you said that we have met all the conditionalities, but we still haven't secured central bank autonomy. We haven't secured the restructuring of state-owned enterprises. We haven't secured a social safety net for the poorer working classes. So a lack of credibility, would you sort of consider the fact that we cannot even create a business proposal to give to bilateral lenders?
Actually, again, the thing is that we see credibility through the lens of the IMF and through the lens of orthodox economics. So if you balance your budget, they say, oh, the foreigners are going to come and invest. No, this is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. If you limit capital inflows, like they said about Malaysia, you remember in the East Asian financial crisis, they said Malaysia would never attract any foreign capital because they imposed rigid controls on capital flows. Who got the most amount of capital? And where did the foreigners all go? Malaysia, because actually they only care about a profits environment. And they're not interested in neoclassical economics or orthodox economics that is telling them, oh, we've got the money supply under control. Oh, we've got the budget deficit balanced. They don't care. Where's the profitability? You know, you ask any business person, I'm going to come and evaluate all these projects on the basis of a profits environment. If there are no incentives for investors in Sri Lanka if there are no incentives to domestic producers, if there's no support. See, our producers are fighting a war with their hands and legs tied together because all the other countries who we want to compete with have governments backing them 150%. You know, we don't have government doing that. And then we ask ourselves, oh, why aren't we successful internationally? Why can't we earn foreign exchange? And then we blame our companies. We say they're lazy and useless. And so this is not true. Other countries are supporting their companies 100%, you know, and I think this is what we need to do, is to get production going and to support our businesses, but also create an environment for foreigners to come here. And we benefit from the technology transfer, the skills transfer, etc. All the things that the East Asians have shown us how to do.
Dr. Ganeshamurthy, now, Dr. Howard mentioned quite a lot of things. Where do you stand on these?
Well, I agree on certain issues, but the issue is creating a business environment in countries like Sri Lanka is not easy, given the political and other priorities. When you see when we don't have the technology by ourselves, our own. So when we have to invite foreign investors, and it will go as a political, you know, propaganda. Not an achievement. It's go against that foreigners are coming and they will, you know, buy all our assets, and our assets are being transferred to the foreigners, and we are losing our, you know, heritage and everything, right? So this type of a politically motivated, there may be some truth in it, because some East Asian countries, their assets are larger part is owned by foreigners, but they are still growing, Hong Kong, when you go to Hong Kong, the assets are owned by mostly foreigners. So they tolerate in that way, but I'm not saying that we have to promote that, but there are other means and ways to control it. And also, most importantly, when you invest in gigantic project like, you know, port, airport, and the telecom tower and all these things, and wait for foreign investors to come and invest, that will not happen automatically. Where the profits are coming in, I totally agree with Professor Dr. Howard in that way, at that regard, because generating profit require certain things, fundamental changes in the economy, and without making those fundamental changes, even with you provide everything, infrastructure, and ask the people, foreigners to invest, or even the locals to invest, they won't do it.
So, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, now Dr. Howard kind of disregarded, you know, cash flow stability and then having a budget surplus as factors that investors look in when they come to invest. Am I right, Dr. Howard? So, do you also agree with that? Does that have no bearing at all?
Well, I don't totally agree with that, but up to a certain level I can agree on that, because business...
Where do you draw the line, Doctor?
Well, profit is the ultimate motive for anyone. In order to make profit, you have to make the cash balances, right? So any foreign investor will not come and invest in a country to, you know, help the country.
Where there's no profitability.
Yeah, of course. So therefore, the fundamental premise is that you want to make the business environment, the playing field is transparent for foreign investor to come and play that role.
So, right? But what I don't understand in Dr. Howard's argument, and I'm seeking clarification from Dr. Ganeshamurthy, if you don't mind, Dr. Howard, is this budget surplus having, you know, enough liquidity and foreign exchange to facilitate investment, or to at least maintain investment or any sort of trade, is it that insignificant?
Well, I think the countries with a larger budget deficit and also larger trade deficit growing faster.
So why not Sri Lanka? Why not?
Fundamental premises are wrong.
Meaning?
Meaning other fundamentals, business. Why American, for example, we can't compare America with Sri Lanka anyway, but the Americans are having the largest budget, the trade deficit in the economy. But what about their investors, investor confidence? Many are going in, even China is going and investing in larger volumes. So profit-making ability in the economy has to be developed. For that purpose, you don't have to have a budget surplus or budget trade surplus.
Wouldn't political stability contribute to
Political stability,
Yeah.
number one. Number two, business profitability, business environment. Create a business environment properly.
Doctor, how to create this business environment which you are suggesting, the profitable business environment,
Now,
how to create it?
Now there is a index called ease of doing business index. Now they stopped calculating in 2021, but now they are going to calculate a new comprehensive index. So there are 9 areas or 10 areas where a country can improve. So including transparency.
Example, if you can.
Yeah, for example, getting permits for a business, starting a business, right? Now in Sri Lanka, if a foreigner come and want to start a business, how many permits he has to get? How many tables he has to go? So all these things.
Wasn't the Board of Investment established to facilitate these?
Board of Investment, EDB, and other many institutions are looking after this, or they are under their purview. But that all these institutions are playing a kind of a marginal role in attracting or improving the situation. And that is why this time they say that no, we want to make a separate unit for inviting foreign investors, creating some kind of a conducive environment for attract foreign direct investment. But so far, I think these institutions are established in the 1980s. So far, couldn't do anything.
So, Dr. Kalpa, what's your take on all of this? Do you think that the budget deficit and then flow of cash, availability of cash, is that insignificant?
Well, I think I totally agree with for Dr. Howard, because I don't see any clear connection with reducing budget deficit and actually growing up a trade deficit. I don't see any connection. For an example, this is a sort of hypocrisy, I would say, from IMF and international financial agencies. In all the crises that took place in the Western economies, for an example, 1929 to 1935, the Great Depression, the way actually economies were recovered due to the government spending. For an example, this is a time period where Keynesian economics came into play.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Keynes suggested to stimulate the economy by spending, by printing money, by spending, by investing. Basically highlighted the role of the government. Stimulate the economy, create a demand.
But
So
Dr. Kalpa, the government has no money to spend.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, let me make my point. Yeah, it's important. The second thing is that when the financial crisis took place in 2007, 2008, once again, the US government spent trillions of dollars, public money, to bail out financial agencies. So why not the developing economies? The government has to play a strong role there. So I think one of the points that I want to make is the government spendings in this point is very important. For example, I think Shania mentioned that there's no enough sufficient amount of safety nets, social safety nets actually built. The government cannot do that when the government actually cutting budget. So that's contradictory.
Then, doctor, do we have money to spend? Do we have enough money in our reserves to spend on these things?
Well, I think this is another myth.
Deficit is all right, but then in order to maintain that deficit, you need to have proper reserves with you, right? All these countries which you referred, America and everyone, they have good reserves, foreign reserves with them.
Right.
So they can bear that budget deficit.
Yes, I don't see there's an issue printing money for productive activities.
Printing money for productive activity.
Exactly.
I think productive being the operative word there.
True, but I think there's no issue in that. For an example, if the government can invest in productive means, there's no issue in that. Because you're actually generating production in the economy. One of the main issues in the Sri Lankan economy is that there's no production basis. All the government enterprises, industries collapsed due to unproductivity, true, but how to gain that, how to reposition that productivity? That's a really important question that we should focus on this particular historical juncture. I think this is a really good point, good historical juncture to actually detach from the practices that we actually practiced in the past. So I think there should be a focus on the government sector. Privatization should not happen. For an example, this is the next step of the IMF deal. There will be privatization in the name of restructuring. So I think there will be greater burden on the lower class of people.
So Dr. Rajapaksa, you don't agree that entities like Sri Lankan Airlines or Hilton should be privatized?
Well, I think before talking about privatization, we have to think about how to gain the productivity, how to increase the productivity. Because I don't agree with the argument that the blessed productivity, the answer should be the privatization. I think we have to properly go through a process.
And the fact that it's bankrupt means that...
Well,
until we finish thinking about how we can increase productivity, and until we take steps to increase productivity, we need to continue to bear the losses. Is that what you're saying?
I think for a while, yes.
For a while?
For a while, yes. Because, the issue is that, for an example, take Sri Lankan Airlines. There were many political appointments, and internally it was actually weakened by the
since it was taken over by the government.
Sure, I agree. But I think this is the high time to think about a different way of management, different way of introducing new technology.
Doctor, you mean that, so without the IMF deal, is there a chance of us successfully restructuring our debt on our own by following these programs? Do we actually need this IMF deal?
I think it's a very important question. Let me approach the question like this. For example, we announced our bankruptcy back in 2021 April.
April.
Exactly. So how we survived this far? That's a very important question that
we've barely survived.
They're not paying the...
Exactly, they're not paying.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the main arguments that I want to make is that get a moratorium for at least 5 years. Delay the payments and get a sustainability, get a sort of strength in the economy, and then start repaying. One of the main things that we can do is basically managing our export income and prioritizing our imports. So that's one of the main things that economists mostly forget.
It's cutting down luxuries.
Absolutely, we have to, because we, in a way, actually sustain a particular need of a particular class. So I think we have to focus on the priorities, focus on the actual needs of the society, rather than actually luxuries. So we have to cut down certain amount of luxuries and prioritize the imports. For example, hospitals are suffering. They don't have sufficient amount of medicine. Surgeries are actually stopped for this very reason. So we have to prioritize these things. So one of the main things that we can do is basically prioritizing the imports and prioritizing the imports and increasing the export income. So for an example, during last 9 months, we have a recorded number of export income. So we have to sustain that. In a country where interest rate is actually increasing, we cannot do that. Businesses are not taking place, investments are not taking place. So that part is also in danger right now.
So Raj, what's your take on all of this? Specifically, I'd like to get your take on what Dr. Rajapaksa said, that he's not all that for privatization of state entities like Sri Lankan Airlines or the CEB, let's say. What's your take on this?
So I would look at the credibility question as, first of all, when the government fails to deliver on its promises or fails on its policies, it affects the business environment as well. And what's interesting is that over the past 3 IMF programs, which span for 12 years, we have only met the targets in terms of revenue, 2 out of the 12 years. So that is concerning, and now Sri Lanka's revenue, as we all know, is at a very low state. So building Sri Lanka's revenue up and meeting the IMF targets would also be a concern. And we're yet to see what those targets are, and the budget also has new revenue proposals. And when we do our analysis and we do the numbers, we do realize that based on government actions alone, the revenue for 2023 will fall short by 10%. So that itself does not give a good indication within the first quarter of the year. And that in itself is not a great confidence enhancing measure. And you might say, okay, people are protesting against all of these taxations, so maybe that's why we're not meeting the revenue. So what I think is that people are protesting against not the taxation, it's the way you're taxing people. So people are protesting against personal income taxes, but that's not the only way you can to collect taxation revenue. We have published papers on this where when you tax cigarettes based on a rational formula, you're able to get an additional 48 billion more. We all know the sugar scam that happened in October 2020. By just reversing the proposal, you get an additional 21 billion more in 2023. The addition of the two is almost around 70 billion. That is more than the amount you're going to collect through the PAYE. So you can not increase personal income tax and do these two, and you can collect it. And then So meeting revenue targets it's the target that needs to be met, and the revenue enhancing measures is something that we need to focus on. And by increasing revenue and by making sure that you make those policies transparent and you let people know, you can generate that credibility for the business environment as well. And what's concerning now is that the government is not in a path to achieve those targets, and we don't see any corrective actions on those phases as well. Now, on privatization, of course, I am not an expert on it, but I feel like currently we need to focus on the debt restructuring negotiations and also the IMF program. And I am not aware of the prior actions of whether we need to privatize state-owned enterprises before we get into the IMF board-level agreement.
Dr. Raj, do you believe in the IMF program? Do you actually believe in the IMF program?
So I would say that we need to lose the idea that the IMF is your knight in shining armor. It is not going to rescue you, and also I see the word bailout, and I am not in favor of that word as well, because I don't see that's an official term used. And bailout seems to be giving you the impression that, oh, IMF comes in, it's great. But that is not your end goal. Your end goal is not securing an IMF program. It is ideally in getting financial market access. Again, just to clarify, it does not mean go and issue bonds and borrow more. It's being able to borrow. And that is it's a clear indication. Maybe that's not the only indication, but that's a clear indication of confidence. And that shows that, okay, the country is in a stable path because you can improve your credit ratings. International credit rating agencies are there for that. So there are objectively good measures that allow you to say that, okay, Sri Lanka is in a credible path. So we need to rephrase the goal and say, what is our end goal? So IMF is maybe the starting point. It's not your end goal. Financial market access, being able to borrow, is one of your end goals. And
Raj, you just said that we were already 10% short of our revenue target, right? And Sri Lanka has, prior to this, signed deals in 2009 and 16, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And we have failed to cooperate domestically, and it's been prematurely terminated.
yes.
It is most likely that the government will go this year and attempt to get board approval at the IMF. Supposing we don't keep to our end of the bargain and there's a premature termination of the deal, what are the repercussions?
So the repercussions are, and you've seen this in many countries, is that down the line we enter into another crisis. There are papers written on this, where countries that get into a debt restructuring, more than 50% of the countries that get into debt restructuring or a debt crisis, need to restructure twice, or at least more than once. And I don't think Sri Lanka is in a situation to afford more than once. And that is why we need to make sure that we know what our policies are, and we have actually evidence-based research and analysis behind our policy action, such that we are able to restructure sustainably and we don't get into a debt crisis down the line again. But suspension of an IMF program, and we've only completed 9 out of the 16 IMF programs. So, and most of the completed ones are also standby arrangements, which are shorter programs. So we've only had 3 EFFs, extended fund facilities, that are for longer, and we've only completed 1, and that was in the 90s. So your concern is correct, and that's why I think the transparency issue is a bigger concern, because that's when public and people can scrutinize the IMF program and debate on the policies and the recommendations and the conditionalities.
When you say people, just in public discourse?
It's a public discourse, because as of now we all have to just have a leap of faith on the IMF, because there's very little transparency. And when there's more transparency, there's more public debate, there's public discourse, and even we are able to comment on it better.
Dr. Rajapaksa, now again, getting back to that entire argument of the government must, get their house in order, state-owned enterprises, despite them making massive losses, need to be, fixed and not privatized as an answer.
Yeah.
The question that I have is, now, when you say owned by the people, not owned by the people, meaning privatization, but the government, for the longest time, has done what they saw fit with these SOEs, meaning allowing their close allies, their family members, friends, whoever, to make massive profits out of it, both monetary and also political leverage. So what really is the issue if these SOEs are made private, meaning put in the stock market as a listed company? Wouldn't that be really more allowing people to engage, be shareholders in these entities and vote on these entities, elect or appoint boards of directors who will be responsible to the Sri Lankan government, not Sri Lankan government, I beg your pardon, responsible to the laws in Sri Lanka, the laws of disclosing how much profits they're making, their financial statements, because the SOEs are not bound by them, are they?
Well, I think I really like the way you framed the question, because the kind of government that we had. So this is why we need a people's government. Don't forget that we are talking about the crisis, but at the same time, there's struggle going on in Sri Lanka for democracy. So this is why we need a particular kind of government, for people's government. So that kind of government would not do such actions. So that's the kind of faith that we have about democracy, about the kind of government. And in such a situation, I think we can successfully move to more profitable government owning, people nationalized entities rather than actually owned by the shareholders. So I think I still hold on to my argument that there should be a particular kind of government representing people with transparency, with democracy, for the benefits of people.
So, but when you say these state-owned enterprises or assets are owned by the people, what do you really mean? Do you mean that the people have more of a say in how they are used, or that they are, figuratively, since they are owned by the state and based on the presumption that the sovereignty lies with the people, therefore the people have ownership over it? What do you mean there?
That's a very interesting question. I think what do I mean by actually, if we can go to the extent of owned by workers, I'm really happy. Right. Owned by the workers who actually work for the entities. Okay. So that's
no, but we are not owned by workers. But when you refer to being owned by the people and not privatized, what do you mean?
Well, owned by the government.
Owned by the government.
Exactly.
So this is based on the presumption, or like Dr. Howard and I were talking on our way here, theories that the people are sovereign, that there's a social contract, and that the government exercises their powers in good faith for the benefit of the people.
Yeah.
But that's not the situation here. So if ownership of the people or the say of the people is the determinant factor in determining whether an asset is privatized or whatever is on the other side of it, don't you think that being a public listed company where people, or like you said, workers, whoever can own shares, can vote, can appoint directors, and have a governing body of that SOE or that company that adheres to the laws of the country, that discloses, that is more transparent, wouldn't that be more of a people-owned enterprise than a government-owned enterprise?
Yeah, I know where you're going, but I think I want to emphasize that what outcomes that it generates to the society. For an example, if actually this entity is generating some price that actually very high, some price that actually cannot bear to a certain class of people, I would not agree. So rather than actually looking at the structure.
So, but then isn't that what the government is there for? Like I've heard a statement that echoes in my head all the time when I can't remember who really said it. Maybe it's something that was said before. The government has no business in being in business. The government is there to regulate. Isn't that what the government is there for? To regulate. Everything is regulated. Like the degree that you regulate can change, of course.
Yeah.
But don't you think that's a more viable way of going forward?
Yeah, the issue is that the government is actually withdrawing from its role rather
from regulation.
Exactly.
So and they're focusing more on doing business. So your argument is that they should focus more on doing business and less on regulating?
Well, for example, take Sri Lankan economy. The government of Sri Lanka actually withdrew from both aspects, doing businesses and regulation.
Both aspects?
Absolutely. For an example, take central bank.
Okay.
What they practiced for a long time is basically they promoted service economy. They actually discouraged the production economy, and they promoted service economy. And on the other hand, they gave up a lot of regulations. They gave up a lot of controlling arms that they had regarding the financial institutions, financial outflows. For an example, there are many institutions, international institutions that recorded more than $40 billion of Sri Lankan reserves actually went out of the country, and central bank still refuses to do a proper investigation on that. For example, central bank governor was very clear. He said, we don't have anything, and we cannot control that. It's their business. It's on record, and so my point is that they gave up both aspects: production and controlling regulation.
So Dr. Rajapaksa, please don't for a second think that I'm in support of privatization or whatever. I'm just trying to understand your argument and trying to come to a consensus on that point. But let's, for example, take the CEB. right? The CEB makes losses over losses for the longest time. And they say that it's because the power is provided at a very concessionary rate, meaning why they had to increase it over 500% over the last few months. But however, in the midst of all of this, the CEB has been paying all of their employees massive bonuses, right? Also, whatever the taxes that were imposed at the time and whatever taxes that the employees of the company were subject to were paid on account of the company. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, when there is a huge deficit, the Treasury comes along and says, hey, you're a state-owned enterprise, right? Let me pay your deficit. And that's the people's money that go in there. But had this been a privately owned entity, they would be bound by the Companies Act of Sri Lanka and the laws surrounding there, and also the rules of the stock exchange. And none of this would have happened. So how do you justify that?
Well, I think I doubt whether it would not happen if a privately owned enterprise actually took.
So privately owned enterprises don't get funding from the Treasury.
Sure.
Privately owned enterprises.
But I mean,
the shareholders of privately owned enterprises will not be happy if the company is making massive losses, and the director board has seen it fit to pay all of their employees massive bonuses, pay the taxes on behalf of the employees. So that's the logical reason why I say that I think it might not happen.
Very true. I think if they're practicing something like that, giving bonuses to these people, I think they should cut it off. So that's very clear. But I think the deeper structure about CEB is that there's no investment, there's no capacity building. That's a deep that's the issue that the government should focus on. I think that's where the government should come up and do the investment. For an example, the solution, ultimate solution for the crisis in CEB is taking Adani and buying electricity from India. Is that the answer? So I think we have more rational, more logical answers that we can actually discover, that we can experiment on. So if you're wasting money,
there's no investment and Adani is investment.
Yeah.
What do you want when you say CEB needs investment?
Well, I think more investments from the side of the government.
No, what I'm saying is you said more investment to the CEB.
Yeah.
And Adani is an investment, but you're saying no, that is not the answer. Then what kind of investment do you want?
The kind of, for an example, CEB power plants.
Okay, what's the investment? From government?
From the government
investment.
Exactly.
So people's money.
Exactly. People's
that the
money.
government doesn't have.
People's money.
Could I also
yes, definitely
something in this? We have an energy crisis in Europe. What's happening? Company after company is now wanting to migrate. Why? Because energy costs are soaring.
Yeah.
Where are they migrating to? East Asia, where they subsidize energy.
Yeah.
Because this is a war of cost of production. Let's make no mistake, we're in a global economic war. And the winners are the countries that subsidize the core costs of production. So when CEB loses money, companies in Sri Lanka gain. Okay, people gain. So we have this very mechanical approach to everything. We say, oh, they're losing money. Actually, a lot of companies in China, in Vietnam, in East Asia, they're all losing money. Look at the transport companies. But critical thing is this is a huge subsidy to the cost of production, which makes them highly competitive. Look at BASF, BASF. They said they're migrating from Germany. This is one of the largest German companies to China. Why? Energy costs. And why is it that with all these oil prices rising and energy prices rising, look at the energy prices in East Asia. They didn't rise very much. They rose for us. They rose for the Europeans. They rose for the Americans who produce the energy. But what did the East Asians think? Costs, competitiveness. This is where we get it wrong. We don't understand that when you privatize, you mentioned the SOEs. I'm 100% with you. You know, a lot of them are corrupt and there to serve the interests of various politicians. But what about the strategic industries? This is crucial. I'll just give you an example. You see, this obsession with privatization is now being reversed in Europe, now. As we speak, the Europeans are now rethinking all the privatizations. UK has gone too far. I'll just give one example. It's a very simple one. The British government privatized the airports. They privatized it and sold it to British Airports Authority, a monopoly. It's a monopoly. It controls 7 of the 8 largest airports. What did they do? They didn't have to reinvest. They're a monopoly. You see, they sold it to a private monopoly. They said, thank you very much. We'll charge whatever we want to charge. We don't have to reinvest in anything. The Daily Telegraph, which is a conservative newspaper who was very pro the privatization, admitted in a study that the average business traveler loses 45 minutes per journey because of the inefficiency of the airports. We have to rethink what we have done. How can you rethink what you have done? It's going to cost the British taxpayer a huge amount of money. Look at British Railway, same problem. You know, you are not thinking properly because there are a lot of short-term profits to be made for a lot of people, but they don't think about what is it going to do to the cost structure of the society. This is the problem. The East Asians, they're much smarter. They understand competition. They understand what this fundamental battle is about, and that's how they manage to keep these costs so low. They're the winners now. You can see this. When I was recently teaching in Vietnam, the managing director of the business school was complaining bitterly to me. He said, every day I have at least 2 different groups coming from Europe to see me, asking me about the environment in Vietnam for investment, etc., etc. They're running away from Europe. Why are they running away from Europe? Because Europe can't keep energy prices down. Now we are thinking of privatizing our energy, selling it to India. You think they're going to subsidize energy in Sri Lanka? Think again. They're not going to do that. We're going to destroy the cost base of the country. Why? Because we're saying, you know, this sacred thing, oh, they'll come and invest and so on. This is a nonsense argument. This is absolutely simpleton argument. These are people who don't understand the very basics of the success of the East Asians. They understand capitalism better than anyone else. They're obsessed with competition. They're obsessed with competition. China does not have one company like Apple dominating the entire smartphone industry. China has 5 giant smartphone companies, 4 of which were deliberately set up to fight against Huawei. Deliberately. Because they want competition, driving down the costs, improving the technology, etc. But when it comes to strategic industries, then they want those industries to make sure the costs for the whole society are low. This is the point that is being made. Now, my experience is that governments are encouraged not to invest in industries like electricity, like water, etc., so that one day the pressure will be so great for the privatization of these things. But we're not thinking smart, you know? It's just like, I'm sorry, I'm a broken record, but it's like we privatized NDB. Where is our cheap cost of funds now? You think the Chinese and the Vietnamese and all the other successful countries are going to privatize that laid the golden egg? They don't do that. They want to make sure that their cost base is as low as they can possibly make it. That's why, for me, it's a very simple thing about privatization. Never create a private monopoly. Never. And never sell it to foreigners. Never, ever do that, because they don't have any responsibility in your country. Where you can sell bits, let's say telecom, let's say the mobile phone sector, why not? Why not privatize it? You can make it competitive. There's dialogue, there's all these other, and we want competition because that drives technology change. It reduces costs. But where you can't guarantee competition, you never do that.
So, Dr. Howard, are you saying that even in critical industries, as you mentioned, power, water, if the investment stimulates competition, then that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, not if the investment, if the privatization allows you to have competition, it's very good. It's very good, because I'm actually a firm believer in competitive capitalism. But there are things like energy. I mean, let's take the example of Enron in the United States. They privatized energy in California. They set up 6 energy companies. They had a regulator, quote unquote regulator. What happens? In 6 months, Enron had bought all the other companies. Where's the regulator? Because there's no amount of money that stops Enron taking over all those other companies and creating a monopoly. Because of the nature of energy, it's actually a scale industry. You know, anybody that is producing produces on a vast scale. By definition, you can't have competition. So you have to be very careful. And you have to make sure that it's not foreigners who are owning this particular resource, because since it's a monopoly, what's to stop them doubling, trebling, quadrupling prices? You still have to pay for it, otherwise, you know, tough luck on you.
But Dr. Howard, we did not see that in the fuel industry as far as, you know, the CPC and the IOC goes. Usually CPC prices mirror the IOC, or should I say the IOC prices mirror the CPC prices.
Yes, because basically Sri Lanka still has control over the core price, you know. Now, when you have control over the core price, like for example, when you have 2 industries and one is dominating because it's actually the market leader and it sets the base price, then you don't have a problem. Okay, so you are supporting that industry. They will undercut any foreign entity that has come in there because they can. It's a different thing. But when you can't guarantee that that industry is going to have some element of competition and you don't control the basic price, then you're in trouble.
So Dr. Howard, you're saying that unless and until we can guarantee that whatever investments coming into Sri Lanka in these critical industries can maintain some sort of competition, we should not go for that. How can you get that guarantee? Like, life is uncertain.
You can think it through. I mean, there are some industries
if you take
that...
Sri Lankan Airlines, for example, what would you... I mean, that's not insured competition.
I don't see why government should own it.
Then Dr. Howard is talking about critical industries like power, water.
Power, water, you know, these are the critical industries. Also, the basic lines in telecom. You know, this is essentially a monopoly because whoever owns those has huge control. Now we say, oh, you know, it's okay to privatize it, we'll put a regulator in charge. Really? Look at the regulators in the world and how effective they have been. They're not been that effective. So what you have to do is be quite discerning about this, because otherwise you're going to end up like, for example, the famous privatization of water in Colombia, in Cochabamba. Okay, water is such a necessity of life. They privatized it. Overnight, the French American company that bought it raised water prices, this is drinking water, by 400%. There was a riot. 19 people were shot dead by the security forces. It was not reported in any Western newspaper. It was only reported in one American paper in the fashion page. That was it. And that is because, you know, you have these privatizations which are actually, in principle, these seem to be so attractive, you know, state companies inefficient, private companies efficient, let's go and do it. But we don't understand the context in which we're doing these things, and we have to think those things through. Otherwise you get this absurd situation, because there's still civil disturbance, you know. Shall I keep going? Sao Paulo, Sao Paulo Light. So they privatized Sao Paulo Light, which is electricity generation in Brazil. And after they privatized it, you know what the name for Sao Paulo Light was? Sao Paulo Dark. Because immediately they cut off electricity to all the poor areas. Immediately.
So, Dr. Howard, based on your argument, what you're saying is that, you know, privatization is necessarily not a good thing. It's necessarily not a bad thing. Just that it has to be done very cautiously, carefully, and there is no one shoe fits all kind of answer.
Absolutely. You summarized it far better than I have done.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. It's a real compliment coming from
Next time I'll do the interviewing and you give the answer.
Okay, let's move on to Dr. Ganeshamurthy. What's your take on this, on privatization? Let's say.
Well, I have a mixed feeling over here.
Mixed feeling?
Yeah, because some of the companies in Sri Lanka, actually, the state-owned enterprises were used to staff political, supporters and others, and also the top positions were given to the most, closer allies with the families, high-ended families, and there are number of workers assigned in this particular, employed in this particular SOEs are overstaffed, not the amount they're actually required for the production process.
Yes.
So it's a traditionally, historically this has been the case. So I agree with Dr. Howard with this co-industries or co-industries for the foreign economy should be at the hand of the government because of two things. One is for fairness purpose. Poorer segments, they have to be getting all these services, number one. Number two, the nature of the business. If it is a monopoly, a single producer can make scale economies. So the cost can be kept down. So when you privatize this, they become private monopolies. They will be producing at a cheaper cost,
but selling at a higher rate.
Selling at a higher price, and thereby making up huge profit. And the government might not have a control to control these giant entities. Probably when you privatize this kind of entity, foreign company will come and take over. So that the local companies are not in a position to take over this, the sheer size of these entities. The local companies are not in a position to handle this.
Now, so, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, when we speak of, programs on how to develop, and specifically on the point of privatization, a lot of political parties have, a very strict approach. Either they are for privatization or they are against privatization. There is no party that would come, or maybe at least very few parties or very few people in those mainstream parties who would come out and be like, look here, these are things that we should do as far as privatization go. These are things that we should do as far as not privatizing certain entities go. So how do you justify that?
That type of a dialogue is very absent in countries like Sri Lanka, because even the pro-privatizers, they use their, the same way they appoint the political appointees in the private state-owned enterprises. They may justify privatization, right? So the right-wing governments are always pro-privatization. But the same governments will appoint the top-level people from their own families and henchmen, right? So therefore, that politically motivated approach to this privatization or keeping the state-owned enterprises as it is, it won't make a big difference of whatever the party in power, right? And there should be, state-owned enterprises are not bad all the time, right? When you privatize, there may be inefficient. This private state-owned enterprises once privatized.
But we need to go by, at least give a little bit of regard to experiences in Sri Lanka. How would you justify that to a Sri Lankan? When you're speaking to an average Sri Lankan, how would you justify and tell them that SOEs can be more efficient than a privately owned company?
Very difficult to convince, because the state-owned enterprises are basically put in that kind of a, not very easy to approach. Not very easy to approach because of two things. One, politically motivated appointments, number one, and the trade unions are so powerful. Any change you want to make, there will be always resistance. So state-owned enterprises can be made making profits, or at least they produce at the cost, making all the benefit to the, delivering all the benefit to the society. So as we talk about the paying super bonuses when the companies were making, not the private state-owned enterprises are making huge losses, how could they make huge bonuses? Bonuses are basically, they are part of the profit distributed among the workers, or they are in a contribution. But when these companies are, state-owned enterprises are making huge losses, they get their share, right? And the treasury pay for this. How can we transform this? How can we change this?
So, Dr. Ganeshmurthy, now let me just try to understand what you're saying, because I see a lot of problems here and no real proposal for a solution, which is what we're looking for. So, on the one hand, you're saying that state-owned enterprises are extremely inefficient in Sri Lanka. Partly reasons being the trade unions are so powerful, they'll resist any change. Then we have family appointed or friends being appointed as heads of these institutions. Then we have corrupt deals going on, all of that, being overstaffed, right? So to make these SOEs or any of these government-owned entities more profitable or more people-oriented would require doing away with some of those things. And that doesn't seem to be happening anytime in the near future, given the political environment in Sri Lanka. On the other hand, you're saying that if these key industries or certain SOEs are privatized to a certain degree, there could be a risk of them rising prices. I think Dr. Howard gave us more than enough examples on what had happened in the past. So as Sri Lanka, given the current context that it's in, where do we go?
Governance. Governance. Because when you have a democratically elected government, right, with transparent and also good governance, good practices, and these state-owned enterprises can be changed in whatever they are practicing. So our society, including Sri Lanka, is a kind of a how the leader behaves, the society behaves in such a way. So it should come from the top, right? So a government with good, transparent, efficient way of doing things, right? If they show and made the people believe that the government is doing the right thing, right? And they will support, and that support will make the enable the government to changes these private state-owned enterprises. Now we were talking about the East Asian experience. The East Asian experience partly because they build up the confidence among the people. We always show this Singapore example. How Lee Kuan Yew got the support from the people? Because he has shown the way, right? Transparent.
And he's a man who was in power for 3 decades, correct me if I'm wrong?
Yes, and maybe he's not democratically
elected.
Not elected, but his certain actions were not democratic. Right?
Yeah, the confidence of the people.
Yeah, but people supported him, isn't it? So when you are doing the right thing, right? You have to be very honest, and you have to show the people you are delivering the right thing, right? Then the people will have the confidence. Whether it is, I'm not about talking about a particular person, but entire government, right? If they are doing the right thing, if they can make the people believe that they are doing the right thing, then the people definitely will support. Now, some IMF programs, some countries basically came out of this kind of mess without IMF program, and the people have supported. They were voluntarily willing to support the government by giving them their gold jewelries. Right?
You're referring to South Korea?
Yeah. Then how did they do that? Because they believed their government.
So Dr. Ganeshmurthy, just to follow up on that question, the absence of an IMF program is contingent, in your example, is contingent on a stable government that's going to be transparent. So we might be a little idealistic in thinking that Sri Lanka can get to like a Lee Kuan Yew level in the next 50 years, I would say, right?
Oh,
so I mean,
I suspect.
It's very negative of you, Shania.
I'm being realistic. I'm
How old
not
will
being
you be by then?
idealistic. But in the interim period, your suggestion is that going to the IMF, is not everything, right? It's not the solution.
Yeah.
So in the interim period, then what is Sri Lanka's solution?
Well, we can't go back now, right? We are almost there.
We're past the point of no return.
And no return. And we go back and start from the beginning, it's too late.
Too late.
So somehow we have to get into this IMF deal, and then according to the government statements, that will unlock roughly around $5 billion worth of assistance from various development partners. So after getting this, what will be the government is going to do? That is the $1 million question we have to ask. What are we going to do? What are they going to do with that money?
So we actually have a question from a viewer that says any assistance from the IMF or World Bank will be wasted as long as politicians misuse it and act irresponsibly. So that, I mean, it's more of a statement, but it kind of follows up to what you just said.
Actually, whenever you get the millions of dollars or billions of dollars, it doesn't matter. If the money is used in the right way, right, in order to overcome the current problems, without wasting it, that may be a temporary solution, but long-term solution would not be lying on the IMF.
Dr. Rajapaksa, do the people have the confidence of them towards the government which we have right now?
I don't think so.
So if all these problems are connected at the end to proper governance, don't you think the first solution we have to take right now is going for an election and electing a government which the people have confidence in?
Absolutely. I think that should be the priority, because we know that this government is strategically delaying the election. So I think that should be the priority. We are actually barricading democracy in this country. So I think that should be a priority. And then get into it. I mean, one of the conditions in the IMF program was actually democratically electing a government, the government that actually have the mandate from the people.
The true mandate.
Exactly, from the people. This government does not have a mandate right now. So I think we should check the democracy. We should go for an election and then determine
the first solution. The first solution we have to take.
But the challenge once again comes up, right? Because what that government is going to do with the IMF, what kind of economic strategy that government is to follow up. So once again, the main issue is actually in hand.
Don't you think that this change of policies with the change of governments has caused us to be in this crisis right now? As you said, now you're not sure about what the next government is going to do with the IMF, how they're going to deal with the IMF.
Yeah, on one hand, yes, I think the inconsistency of economic policies is actually one of the main issues, main things that actually brought us here.
Don't you think democracy has caused this actually? Because now if we don't have a democratic government and if we have a proper leader, don't you think that?
Well, I'm someone who does not believe in a leader. I believe in believe in people who actually engaged in production, engaged in economic activities. So I don't think that everything, all the messages, controlling should come up from the top. So there should be democracy, power that actually inbuilt in the foundation as well. So, yeah.
Dr. Rajapaksa, I think this conversation has come to a really important juncture, because last week on the show we had a group of politicians, lawyers, a few, who spoke about democracy in Sri Lanka, who spoke about the importance of election. And one of the main arguments that we did discuss about is the argument that is propounded by the government, saying that we don't have money to hold the election. Now, today we have the pleasure of hosting 4 economists who would comment on this contention. So let's start with the most fiery panelist for tonight, Dr. Howard. Dr. Howard, what do you really think of this? Because now, for the general public at least, or let's just say a majority of Sri Lankans, they think of a government and a country as being a household. And let's just say the top leadership or the top brass of the government being the father. When there is no money to do a certain thing, or let's say to hold a small election in the house, you don't do it because it's not essential. It's more important to feed the family and clothe the family. and take care of the family. But that is far from the truth, is it not, Dr. Howard? So how could you draw this distinction in a way that people could understand?
Well, I'm going to be very wicked to you, and I'm going to say that a lot of these discussions are actually by the by, in the sense they're digressions from what I call the elephant in the room. And that is that we continuously try and avoid discussing something that we have been blocked in doing, and that is aggressively going after an export-oriented industrialization. I repeat, our problem fundamentally is a 40-year trade imbalance exceeding 10% of GDP. Now, let me just give you one simple statistic that we have worked on. We have taken 120 developing countries. We've split them into industrializing and non-industrializing. All the non-industrializing countries continuously have trade imbalances and current account imbalances. All 55 countries that are now going to the IMF come in that category. So it's not just Sri Lanka, it's every single country that is not industrializing is there. Every industrializing developing country always has a positive trade balance and a positive current account balance. There's no discussion of budgets, there's no discussion of democracy, there's no discussion of anything else. I mean, one of those countries is Vietnam. There's no electoral process, etc. But if the government doesn't do the right thing, I assure you it'll be replaced by another government in Vietnam, because people get angry and they will make their anger felt, even though there's not what we understand as the conventional democratic process in Vietnam. Actually, there's a system in which people's voices are heard. So I keep going back. Now, my question is, why do we keep ignoring the elephant in the room? Why is that? Because we have been told this is off the table. We're being told by foreign powers, you are not allowed to discuss export-oriented industrialization. If you go down that road, we will block you. You can do anything else you want, but this you are not allowed to do. I have worked with successive governments since the Premadasa government in 1991. And let me tell you what happens. So we discuss. Before the government comes to power, we're discussing export-oriented industrialization and details. I'm not talking about these vague terms. I'm talking about details, the tax structure, the financing structure. What are the tariff barriers they're going to face internationally? Everything, right down to the microscopic detail. What do I hear after the government comes to power? Well, Howard, it's complicated. No, I know what they're saying to me. I'm sorry, the foreign powers have gotten to us and told us, you can't go down this path. And this is not one government, it's not two governments. I can tell you it's at least three that I know of personally. So what I'm saying to you is what we are discussing around this table is very cosmetic. We are ignoring the most fundamental thing, because if we do that, I guarantee you within 10 years, we will start to move into the upper middle income bracket.
Dr. Howard, you mean, which you suggest is that is IMF is a tool they use to block us going down this path?
Yes.
Is IMF actually?
After the Second World War, the West needs raw materials. And one agreement they came to is we will not let raw material countries industrialize, period. Okay? Who is our agent? Actually, the agents are the IMF and the World Bank, you know, and of course now the WTO. You just look at all the WTO rules and regulations. They block developing countries. For example, let me just tell you the investment codes. Okay, now we make these deliberately obscure, nebulous, But the investment code is stopping countries from now on demanding that multinationals that come in export a certain amount of the goods they produce. It's stopping countries demanding transfer of technology. It's stopping countries demanding skills upgrading. It's stopping countries using domestic resources. Why do you think? Because they're at the top and they don't want the countries at the bottom joining them at the top because there's not enough space. So it's a very deliberate policy. Unfortunately, we're caught in the middle of that, you know, and okay, that's the reality. But you know, what I don't like is all this hypocrisy that goes on, all this cosmetic discussions, when in fact we know exactly how we can get out of this, and we know exactly the consequences. We know that because other countries have done it. Let me just give you the, sorry, I'll take a couple of minutes. Vietnam. I have a lot of Vietnamese students. They come and tell me in around 2000, oh, we've just got a deal with the IMF. And, you know, they told us to liberalize our financial markets, and we're doing that. And a Harvard team came and echoed what they said. You must come and invest, Professor, because they know I invest my money. Whenever I believe in something, I invest my own money. It's not just talk. And I said, what are you doing? Are you going down the export-oriented path? No, 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 that's old-fashioned. Now we found the new panacea, you know, financial liberalization. And I said, no, I'm sorry. You know, oh, you're going to miss out because our stock market is rising. 2006, the stock market of Vietnam crashes 80%. There's a huge financial crisis. By 2009, the Vietnamese government starts to realize something. We have now an opportunity to go down the real path that actually they knew. They have been trying to go down the export-oriented industrialization path, but they didn't have the geopolitical opportunity. Now they turn around to the Americans and say, we hate the Chinese like you hate the Chinese. You want to relocate out of China, come to Vietnam. By 2012, they set in motion this incredible industrialization machine. Vietnam in 2000 had half Sri Lanka's per capita income, half. Last year they surpassed us. That is how fast. Vietnam's total value of exports is now greater than all of India and all of sub-Saharan Africa. That's what has happened since 2012, you see. This is what is possible. And if you look at, I mean, when I go there and I see my students driving around in all sorts of luxury cars, and I look at the standard of living, it's just incredible. And that's what I'm saying. That is there for us. I saw it under President Premadasa. I saw it with my own eyes. How much did the Sri Lankan stock market rise in just 2.5 years? 300% in dollar terms. You know, why? Because we were doing the right thing. You know, and that is the right thing. It wasn't about balancing budgets. It wasn't about, let's say, you know, having the right democratic structures and so on and so forth. We still had a democracy at that time, although President Premadasa, I'm not sure, could be described as a real Democrat, but still he did the right thing. You know, he was a sort of Lee Kuan Yew for us. And this was what is very important. And, you know, that's why, so forgive me, you know, I get impatient with all these cosmetic discussions, you know, because really we're not getting down to the nitty-gritty. And IMF doesn't want to hear it. They don't want to have those discussions with us. And that's, of course, I understand.
Dr. What is the track record of the IMF in successfully helping nations to recover from these?
Actually, it's very poor. It was very interesting because I watched a video today where Mr. Varoufakis, Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek.
Greek economist.
He was the Greek Minister of Finance for a very brief period, but he had this experience with the IMF. And he was debating with others who were very pro IMF package and so on. And he gave one example. I mean, apart from him saying that this is nonsense to say that Korea actually took the IMF medicine and did well and so on. In fact, they didn't do that. But he gave the example of Poland. And that was interesting to me because I also checked it straight afterwards. He said that Poland had to do, just after the wall came down and they were really struggling, they entered into negotiations with the IMF. But the IMF package was so odious to the Poles, they decided, no, we can't do this. We'll have a riot in our country and, you know, there'll be turmoil. Mm-hmm. So they went their own way very successfully. And then he tells us that insiders in the IMF told him that indeed, if the Poles had taken the IMF medicine, it would have been a disaster. That actually the Poles did the correct thing. So these are people inside the IMF told him that, in fact, the medicine wasn't appropriate.
Yes, Dr.
Can I come in for a minute? I think it's a very important point. I have some information because I think something that you said that we all tell things like opinions, but I think these are statistics. Okay. I have some. This is actually an economist from IMF, Mohsin S. Khan. He actually did some research on do IMF support programs work. He published it in 2002. What he says basically, he took 16 countries that actually implemented IMF program. He come to this conclusion. So 7 countries have positive impact on balance of payments, 3 countries have negative impact, and 2 countries does not have any impact. Inflation, in terms of inflation, 2 countries were actually able to reduce the inflation. 10 countries experience increase in inflation. Economic growth, in terms of economic growth, 4 countries had the positive outcomes, and also 7 countries actually had negative impact. His conclusion is basically that IMF programs can affect positively on balance of payments and trade deficit, but in the long run, it creates issues in inflation. Basically, it keeps the inflation high, and there's no connection to economic growth. So I think this is inside information. So people who are working inside IMF, they also do not believe in programs like that.
Raj, what's your take on this? You've been quite silent.
So I think it is, again, I would always go back to saying that the government should also take a lot of responsibility in its policies. And it heavily depends on what the government is planning on doing and why. So
when you say government policies, right now, do we have government policies or IMF handed down policies?
We have no transparency over them.
You don't know.
We don't know.
What you're saying.
Yes. So, for example, I would always go to cigarette taxation policies because that was something that was introduced very recently in Jan.
You a smoker, Raj?
I don't smoke, but we study tobacco for our research purposes. So I study taxation policy on tobacco, and I limit myself to that. So what's interesting is the budget basically said we want 140 billion in revenue from cigarette taxation. And in order to do that, you have to increase your taxes on cigarettes. So the government did that. In mid of January, they increased it by 20%. But when you do the numbers and when you adjust the price elasticity of demand, you don't get 140 billion. You get only 92 billion. So when you work backwards to say, okay, let's say you want 140 billion, how much do you need to increase taxes? You realize that taxes have to go up by 147%. So those are policies that when you have evidence-based research, and this is published and has not been contested yet. So when you don't have evidence-based policy researches, then yes, it makes it very hard to grow or develop. And even the World Bank also for 2023 projects Sri Lanka to have the worst economic growth in 148 countries for 2023. So it all amounts to how are our policy decisions made and what is the research or evidence or analysis behind it.
Mr. Raj, you said that in your opening statement, you said that there are questions in regard to the debt structuring analysis presented by the IMF.
Yes.
Also, so did they actually feed us with wrong data, and did they create a wrong image in the global business community about Sri Lanka?
No. So what my concern was that it is not made public. So anyone can do an DSA or the sustainability analysis. It's your assumptions that come into play, right? For example, what is your expectation on interest rates? What is your expectation on growth, primary deficit, primary surpluses?
Because there's no guarantee.
There is no guarantee. So those are all assumptions, and that is what you need to scrutinize when you look at a DSA. And when we do our DSAs, we make the Excel public, we allow public scrutiny. And what we expect is the IMF to do the same, because that is what everybody is using as a golden standard when they're giving financial assurances or when restructuring Sri Lanka's debt. So we need to basically scrutinize on the DSA and say why are these assumptions made, and are these assumptions realistic?
But Raj, historically, has there been transparency from other governments that sought IMF help?
Historically, no, and that is why this time we need to make a change. And just because historically it has not been made, doesn't.
I'm not speaking Sri Lankan governments. Yes. I'm speaking internationally, globally.
Other countries.
Globally, apart from the Argentinian case study, which happened now, there are countries that do publish the prior actions. But what Sri Lanka has been doing is we only know the prior actions and the program conditionalities once the board level agreement is signed and the LOI is made public to Parliament. So by then it's too late because everything has been agreed upon. We haven't really seen, and that is something that we need to push for.
What about the contention of the government that, if we publish this document, it could be detrimental to Sri Lanka securing this debt? Is there any truth to that?
Because if I recall, President wanted this document to be published before he got elected as the president.
You mean selected?
Selected, yes. But then now he's not willing to publish it.
Yes.
Why is this?
So we don't really know why it is he's not willing to publish. But
he wanted it before.
Yes.
Before he became selected as the president.
But I think when you don't publish it, what you encourage is speculation. And speculation is harmful for the economy as well. But when you make it public, you allow public scrutiny, and that allows for better policy decision making. So saying that you don't want to make it public because it's market sensitive is also detrimental to the economy.
So one instance that I think certain government MPs cited was the fact that if we announce certain tax hikes that will be detrimental, or a date or a time frame in which they will come into effect, that will be extremely detrimental to the country. Doesn't that make any sense to you?
That doesn't make sense to me, because if you can back your taxation policies up with analysis and prove that this is why you're raising it, and if there's a proper rationale behind it, I think people would make it would make no sense. Because but if you're doing ad hoc policy making like the cigarette taxation, then of course it is market sensitive. But what we need, that's why I initially said we need to advocate for analysis-based policy making.
So Dr. Rajapaksa, we saw several protests today, university lecturers being among them, against this massive tax hike that was made in Sri Lanka just at the start of this year. So on this tax hike, what the government says is, unless we increase taxes to this level, we can't secure the IMF program. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Dr. Ganeshamurthy who said that we're past the point of no return as far as the IMF option goes. We can't afford to go back and start from scratch, like what Dr. Howard proposed would be a better way for Sri Lanka to move forward. So against such a backdrop, now I do understand the lack of transparency from the government on what they're spending it for, lavish Independence Day celebrations and all of that. But what do you propose, or what does the university lecturers or all these professionals, very, very, very educated people, propose the tax scheme is like?
I think one of the proposals that we came up with was basically to tax the rich, tax the big corporations, companies who actually profit, for example.
People like Dr. Howard.
Oh, well, I should comment on that. But I think people who actually profited, get profit from the economic activities. So one of the key areas that we can focus on the corporate taxes. So without actually taxing the professionals and also the lowering class. For example, the rising inflation and also rising interest rate is actually sort of taxing them, sort of cutting their real budget, real income. So without getting into that part, one of the main proposals that we came up was actually taxing the rich, taxing the corporations.
So when you say taxing the rich, how much can you get from the rich now? The pay tax brings about 100 billion, correct me if I'm wrong? somewhere around 100 billion. So you think we can get that from the rich in Sri
Well,
Lanka?
I think more than that. I don't have the numbers right now, but I think definitely it will exceed that number.
So would you agree with the tax structure where the minimum non-taxable amount would be about 200,000? Is that possible?
I think it's possible because, I mean, previously, for an example, when IMF programs came up, what they proposed was basically taxing the poor, cutting the welfare. This time, for some reason, I think they wanted to focus on 100,000 margin. So that's the issue. So I think 200 is a fair amount at this level of crisis, at this level of difficulty.
About 200 is rich.
Say it again, sorry.
About 200 is rich. Is the rich community.
Yeah, if you take that as a determining amount, yes, but I don't think.
Well, it's actually funny because according to the current US dollar exchange rate, even though it's appreciated, let's say a family of 4 in Sri Lanka would usually have one breadwinner, which would be the father.
Yeah.
So calculate that, and to live above the poverty line, one person in that family needs to earn somewhere around 99,000, give or take a few thousand. So Sri Lanka's poverty line, as far as a single ordinary Sri Lankan family is concerned, is about 100,000. So technically the government is taxing.
I want to just say one thing. I don't know if you saw the webinar with Jayati Ghosh and Varoufakis.
Not really.
And then there's Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, because he has been very, well, I think instrumental in bringing the whole agreement with the IMF to fruition. Now, he said a very interesting thing when Professor Jayati Ghosh criticized him, or criticized the IMF and especially the taxes as being regressive. He said, yes, in Sri Lanka, we should be having far more progressive taxes. He said the rich get away with murder, basically. That's what he said. And I was taken aback, because if that's his belief, then I can't understand why we haven't negotiated a far more progressive tax regime, because it was very clear. I mean, he even elaborated on it, and I was completely startled, because, and I think Varoufakis and Jayati Ghosh were also completely taken aback that Indrajit was much stronger than they were. He said, because you have all these rentiers and others who avoid taxes, you know, while this tax burden is falling on the people who can least afford it. And, you know, I mean, it wasn't just a passing comment. He was very forthright with it. So I think there is this understanding that indeed, you know, where we are today is not really where we should be, given the principle of progressive taxation.
And I think that again falls to what we were discussing about structural issues. The fact that when it comes to paying corporate taxes, there are about 3 appeals in the Inland Revenue Department, following which you can appeal to the Court of Appeal, then the Supreme Court. So you will be paying the taxes due for that year in about, what, 8 years? 9 years.
There's another issue. Sri Lankan economy has a larger informal sector. So the informal sector
is not touched.
Not touched in the tax net. So what should happen is not raising the tax, lowering the tax rates, and broaden the tax base, covering this informal sector people. And that should be the right way to, you know, progress, rather than, you know, squeezing the top. Right? And also there is a way. I mean, the savers, those who are saving in a country, not only in Sri Lanka, those are the rich people, are the savers. Normally, out of their income, the larger percentage is saved by the rich people. Rich in the sense, you know, I'm not talking about the rich in terms of Sri Lankan rich.
Like Dr. Howard Rich.
Now, as you said, as you correctly pointed out, the 100,000 is the bare minimum for an average family, right? So 100,000 is a bare minimum. So if you
live above the poverty line,
just above the poverty line, with all this inflation and all of the cost of living increases, right? So rather than doing that, there are alternative ways to raise taxes. It may be a medium term policy to check out this informal sector people, also bring them also into a tax net. So that may be a sustainable way of increasing government revenue rather than you take that, you know, those who, I mean, there is a special group, those who are earning by their payrolls. They are the easy targets.
They're the easy targets.
Easy targets.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ganeshamurthy. We will now go into our closing arguments because, well, we've spent so much time, I didn't even see the time going. It's almost 11:30, time to close. We got the final opening statement from Raj Prabhu, so why don't you start off the closing statements?
Sure. So I think in closing, what we need to realize with the IMF program is that, like I said earlier, is the IMF program may be the start, but completing an IMF program is not your goal. It is getting financial market access and then moving on from there. And that should be the goal. And when you set your goal as financial market access, it broadens. So you focus on the longer term. You just don't focus on, let me get the IMF program as soon as possible. You take your time, think of policies that actually benefit the economy and move forward. And I think reiterating that the goal is the financial market access is key. At the same time, improving transparency is important because when you have a lack of transparency, it's hard to hold anybody accountable because you don't have information. And that allows for vested interest, corrupt practices to come into play, which is how we got into the crisis as well. So we also have a governance crisis in addition to our economic crisis. So improving transparency and reframing the goal as financial market access should be our key. And I think that should be the key moving forward as well.
Thank you very much, Raj Prabhu, Senior Research Analyst at Verite. Now move my attention to Dr. Kalpa Rajapaksa, Lecturer, Department of Economics and Statistics, University of Peradeniya.
I have a very closing statement actually. IMF is not a solution, and IMF cannot solve our internal issues. Think about the structural issues in the economy. IMF cannot do anything to that. So I think one of the main strengths that we have to build up as a country is the internal strength of the economy. Going back to the argument, going back to the model of having an export-oriented industrialization, not a easy task basically, because if you want to really come out of the crisis, we have to rebuild that production foundation. And also, one of the main arguments by the IMF and the IMF-friendly economies is that we are basically purposely contracting the economy. There will be a point where the economy would actually recover, grow up. We don't know where's the point. For example, I have the statistics. World Food Program actually recorded 54% of the households in Sri Lanka actually base their consumption on debt. 50% of wage earners on income has gone down. The food inflation is around 70 to 80%. So what is the depth? We don't know where the real depth is, and the people who actually pay for this recovery. So what they are asking, basically the government and the economists who are friendly to the IMF, what they're asking is basically bear this burden and there will be a recovery. So I don't see that recovery is coming to Sri Lanka. So that's the question. That's the question we should seriously focus on. Without that, I think it is meaningless to discuss about the IMF program and future of the Sri Lankan economy.
So when you say IMF is not the answer, do you mean that we should now not go to the IMF?
We went actually. There's no comeback. But I think if we have a different government, there should be a renegotiation. So that's a question of which government, which party should be.
So how does that really work now? Once the program is approved, the first tranche is released, then you go back on your word? Doesn't look too good, does it?
Well, I think we have to take our chances. We have to do another negotiation, because one of the main things, as I mentioned before, the IMF asked for a people's mandate. So they might agree on that. I'm not someone who's actually proposing to go to IMF, but if the government is willing, the appointed government is willing, that's the task is very open.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalpa Rajapaksa, Lecturer, Department of Economics and Statistics, University of Peradeniya. I now move my attention to Dr. Ganeshamurthy, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the University of Colombo.
Thank you. I don't believe that the IMF just pressing the Sri Lankan government, do this, do that. Like, the government wanted to do that, and IMF has taken as a pretext, because we know that there were earlier cases. One on early occasion in 1979, J.R. Javadana, to pass his first budget, he came to the parliament and said, we want to pass this budget. IMF came to our assistance, and we have to pass this budget, and we have to open the economy, otherwise they will not pay money. And they will give money for investment, but not to eat. So that was exactly the statement he has made. So he has taken IMF as a pretext to implement his own policy. And this is the second time that I'm hearing the same type of a tone, saying that we need to do this, otherwise we are not able to get, we will not be getting the IMF support, right? So I don't see a difference in policy, economic policy of the IMF and the present government. So it's a local policy, or our own policy supported by the IMF. Whether right is right or wrong remains to be seen. As of now, the people are facing, or people are feeling, the brunt of IMF policies.
But are they really IMF policies?
Government policies align with the IMF targets. So I'm not saying that the IMF is insisting Sri Lankan government to do this, otherwise you don't get the money.
You're not saying that?
Not saying that.
Then what are you saying?
I'm saying the government wanted to do that and take the IMF as a pretext.
Okay.
Yeah. Because otherwise, you can't put this in front of the public, because the present government believe that this is the exact way the economy should behave, and this is the only way you can recover the economy. So that is the policy belief, or that is the economic policy they are believing.
And the IMF is the scapegoat?
I don't want to say in that way, because it's taken as a cover.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the University of Colombo. Finally, we have Dr. Howard Nicholas, Senior Lecturer in Economics, for your closing statement.
Thank you, Sharon. Of course, I can just repeat the export-oriented industrialization mantra, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, with my closing statement, raise another issue. We talk of transparency, democracy, correct? Okay, so we're obsessed with this. But yet, we are now gazetting an act which is actually going to reduce democratic control over the most important institution, the central bank. And we take as our role model the US Federal Reserve. We say, oh, that's independent. Most people don't realize it's controlled by the commercial banks. It was set up by the commercial banks to bypass scrutiny of Congress. Recently, a report was written, it's the most undemocratic institution in all of the United States. It doesn't present any accounts. No one is allowed to question its policies in Congress. It has now actually destroyed the world economy with the greatest printing experiment in history. Not one single piece of legislation has ratified what it has done. It has transferred $6.7 trillion. I'm not saying billion, I'm saying $1 trillion to the rich, to the 1%. Undemocratic, unelected institution with no public oversight. The Western countries, the IMF has been pushing every single country towards central bank independence, so that we follow in the same footsteps. It doesn't matter who you elect in future, because this is the key economic institution. They can make or break any government they want with the monetary policies, and nobody has a right to interfere with them. after this Monetary Law Act has been passed. So transparency, come on guys. Transparency, democracy, hypocrisy. Utter hypocrisy of the highest order, you know. So, you know, it's like the Americans say, oh, we're a democratic country and so on. The most powerful body in the US and the world, unelected, and it's a lovely instance. Before Donald Trump became president, he made this one of his most important election promises. He said, I'm going to force an audit of the Federal Reserve. Gets elected, calls Janet Yellen in. She goes to the White House, goes to the president's room. 15 minutes go by, Janet Yellen walks out, Donald Trump walks behind her like that, head bowed. I'm perfectly satisfied with what I've heard from the head of the Federal Reserve, because he was told, you can touch anything you want. You don't dare touch this, because this is the bank of the rich elites. This is the bank we use all over the world. And what they want with this shift towards central bank independence is to lose the democratic control over the most important institution. And after you lose that, you can elect who you want. You know, but you will not be able to control your country any longer. So, you know, sorry guys, you know, we're talking transparency, democracy, but again, it's another elephant in the room. You know, we don't care about this one particular act, and it's so convoluted, the way it's phrased, that, you know, people will not actually delve any deeper into it. I mean, we were talking about the legal ramifications of this. Trust me, you are not facing just the central bank, public bureaucrats. You are facing an international community that is doing this all over the world. Because once we make it independent, who do you think is going to control it? What, the people of Sri Lanka? Really? No. It's going to be not even the rich elites of Sri Lanka. It's going to be the rich foreign elites who will control our economy via the central bank.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard Nicholas, Senior Lecturer in Economics, for, well, leaving us hanging at the end of the show. Usually we try to close the show by the closing arguments, but of course you've brought up another issue that you slightly alluded during the discussion, but we didn't delve in deep. However, of course, we will continue our discussions on Face the Nation for and on behalf of the people to keep you informed. Once again, thank you to all members of the panel, Dr. Howard, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, Dr. Kalpa Rajapaksa and Raj Prabhu for joining us on our show tonight, and of course educating the general public on these very, very, very technical matters. Thank you very much also to Attorney at Law Ravindra Jayakodi. I forgot your name there for a second. Sorry about that. And also Shania Dedigama for asking the right questions on behalf of the people. And with Dr. Howard's closing statement, of course, I wouldn't blame anyone if they draw up the conclusion that all progress is precarious. The solution to one problem seems to bring us face to face with another. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. God bless.